The extent we take that perspective, we turn spiritual. The one who is closer to the cause, to the source, is one who is more spiritual. And all of this culminates, whatever I'm basically saying is essentially a result of what Sri Sri Thakur summarized in just one sentence. What he says in Satyanusaran, the ideas and activities that lead man towards the cause are spiritualism. Anything that leads us towards the cause, that constitutes spiritualism. When you take that, then you see that science and spirituality are not at odds with each other, because in both science as well as in spirituality, we have this quest towards the cause. There are subtle differences, and we are going to explore that. There are methodological issues and so on and so forth, but both of them are essentially journey towards the cause, and science in some sense is very much an integral part of spiritual quest. So, taking this broader stand from Sri Sri Thakur saying, what is the converging point? So, on the left side, you have the night sky. You have the moon that appears big. You have the stars that appear small. Science dispels this illusion. Science tells it's the other way around. The moon is indeed smaller, perhaps, than the stars which are far away. On the right, you have someone who is undergoing a period of stress, anxiety, and so on. She too is trying to find out or figure out the cause that can explain this. Maybe, analogous to the night sky, we have a sky in our mental world in which our personal problems appear too big. The current space, the time, the people, individuals, the setting, that appears too big, and something else loses context. Spirituality is supposed to dispel that illusion, very much like how science dispels this illusion about the night sky, and position things in perspective so that we can have clarity of vision, which is of paramount importance if we have to take decisions that essentially are something that are beneficial for us along with those with whom we are interacting. So this is kind of something that all of us have experienced. There are exams that we have written in class 5th, 6th, 7th. Some of us have become toppers in this exam and so on. And none of those certificates, none of all those achievements give us any pleasure today. The current stress, PhD scholar may be sitting here somewhere, some student maybe they're undergoing stress. All the past achievements are not coming to any use, which means at that particular moment, that particular achievement was like the moon. It was so big, right? But today it is dwarfed by other. So what exactly is the perspective? So the pressure that we are having right now, we need a perspective. We need the right kind of clarity to essentially view it. And that cannot be possible unless we move us closer and closer to the cause. Not just things as they appear to be, but things as they truly are. So, the advent of Copernicus, for example, in science. So earlier we used to think the Earth is the center of this universe, and then came this heliocentric picture, the sun is at the center, that kind of kept evolving and so on. So there was a change, or there was an evolution of models in science. Right? Theories keep evolving. Similarly, in our personal lives, we start off with a theory and say that, oh, my personal priorities, this sense of discomfort, this is at the center, I am at the center, right? And then we move towards the living ideal, and the living ideal provides us the perspective that is needed to explain observation. So why did science essentially move out from the picture where the Earth was at the center to the heliocentric? Because that was a better explanation, and then even that evolved. So we are having some observations in life. We want to come to explanations of these observations that can allow us to make more informed judgments about what we should be doing. And that's precisely where the evolution of the self is also needed, and that's precisely where the concept of living ideal is needed. What exactly should be at the center? And then, just as you have science and then you have engineering that makes use, this is an engineering institute, so we are taking the results of science and we are essentially making use of science to devise artifacts, right? You know thermodynamics, then you can essentially make fridges or AC, for example, work, and so on and so forth. You know, if you know the basics of mechanics, or statics, or dynamics, you can make bridges stand and so on. So, this particular understanding of the cause, the penetration into the cause, can give us a way to engineer our inner selves so that we proceed on the path of expansion and enjoy our lives. That's the true goal, right? The end result is, the end goal is that. And as it was kind of mentioned a while ago, this idea of a physician, right? We have hatred, detestation, so on and so forth. But when you look at physician, right, he takes this perspective, which is of a scientist, right? There is a disease, it needs to be cured. Sri Sri Thakur showed us how to actually do this. Hate the sin, not the sinner is an adage, but how to actually implement. This is what he has demonstrated through his life. And this is what Sri Sri Acharya Dev continues to do today as his living embodiment. His presence in flesh and blood is what we have even today. So when there was someone with all of these kind of things, a criminal, an offender, a serial offender, someone who was despised in society, this was looked at as just a disease that needs to be cured. There was nothing like hatred. There was something with all attention, with all love, with all care, what can be done to bring that person out of it. And finally, I have a point here, which is, as researchers, we have a sound understanding of the research methodology. We understand that we have hypotheses, we essentially make observations in nature, and then we have hypotheses about why these observations could have happened, and then we systematically have a process of testing these hypotheses and arriving at theories and so on. And then these theories keep getting refined as we have more and more observations, some of which may be contradicting the theory and so on. That's how theories keep evolving. Now, as a researcher, we do that in our labs. We do that when writing research papers. But are we the same person with the same kind of scientific outlook when it comes to our everyday dealings with people? When my wife shouts at me or is kind of not disappointed with me for some reason, do I just shout back at her, or do I say this is an observation? There must be some hypothesis about why this may have happened. Do I give myself time to figure out why this could have happened? So the regulation of an ordinary man, right? This is for the man on the street. This is for something that applies. So science is not exclusively for the lab. It is the same process, which is essentially of going from observation to hypothesis, systematically testing them, figuring that, and trying to find a redressal. Actually, what could actually work? So this is what a medical practitioner would do. He would essentially find out with surgical precision what is the most efficient way to essentially resolve this current problem. And this is the way that Sri Sri Thakur has shown us, that science has to be deeply ingrained in us. It is not something of peripheral interest. And therefore the life of a scientist has to be normal in all respects, not just in writing technical papers and getting accolades and honors and all of that, right? His family life, his personal life, his social life, everywhere he goes, how that can be normally adjusted. Sorry. So this is the saying of Sri Sri Thakur: if you at all have found fault and it remains stored in your head, inquiring into its cause and circumstances, properly understanding how it became possible, with a feeling of sympathy, emptied out from your head what is stored there in such a manner that it becomes abnormal to you for this kind of thing to happen again. So Sri Sri Thakur is called abnormally normal, right? So we say, oh yeah, everyone gets frustrated, so it's normal to do that. Sri Sri Thakur says, no, that's not normal. As a human being, this model of perfection is normal, where one is perfectly methodical, perfectly situated in the cause, perfectly situated in the sincere quest for the cause. And that's the normal state. And we are aspiring for that state of normalcy, not the crowd sense of normalcy, where, oh, everyone does that, I mean, that's fine. So we don't settle with that mediocre. The question, the million-dollar question now is science not enough? Do we need anything like spirituality? Is the scientific method not enough? So, first of all, we have to understand that science has its limits. The first is the cognitive limit, and the second is the existential limit. The cognitive limit of science says that theories simply don't have proofs. I know many students get surprised when I say, there are no proofs in physics and so on. They say, we've always been doing proofs in physics, and you say there are no proofs. That's kind of, proofs only exist in mathematics, where you can devise your own axiomatic framework and you kind of pretend to be a demigod, and then within that axiomatic setup it kind of works, right? You prove properties of systems. But when it comes to physics, when it comes to observing nature, right, be it physics, biology, whatever, when you are observing nature, then this is not your creation. Therefore, you can at best say this is a good explanation. This theory is a good explanation, and you can test it against experimental data that you have got, right? And you can say that it kind of, there is some kind of corroboration, and then there is, where it departs from that, you can essentially go and modify your theory to come to a better theory. But at no point in time can you essentially say that your theory is complete, because there is always a chance that you will encounter a new observation which it kind of fails. And that's how theories keep evolving. I mean, Newton's theories, we saw something about the orbit of Mercury, and then relativity came along, and the revised theories of gravitation and so on came along and so on. So that's the idea. So theories don't have proofs, and there is always this cognitive limit that the second problem, which is even more serious, is the existential limit, right? Which means that there are just certain questions which science is not designed to answer at all, right? So I'm just going to give you some glimpse of this existential limit. This is Peter Medward, who's a very famous British biologist who went on to win the Nobel Prize. So this is what he says: the existence of a limit to science is made clear by the inability to answer childlike elementary questions. How did everything begin? Why are we here for? What is the point of living? The question of meaning is essentially outside science. This is not something that is. So science deals with mechanism, not with meaning, right? So that is the key idea. And there is a very clear distinction between mechanism and meaning, right? And the distinction between mechanism and meaning comes out very clearly in the work of John Polkinghorne, who was a famous quantum physicist. And he had this very nice example. Why is the water boiling in the kitchen, right? There's some water boiling in the kitchen, why is the water boiling? And there are two answers to this question. If you ask a scientist, you would essentially say that the water molecules are moving far away from each other, there's some state transition or whatever going on. But if you ask the person who is actually making this, in the kitchen, say the water is boiling because I want a cup of tea. Now the fact that all of this is happening because a cup of tea has to be made is outside science. Science cannot answer the question of why the tea was made to boil in the first place. Why did the universe start the way it is? Why we have taken this human form? What was the purpose of our existence? These are not the questions. So these are the questions of meaning as opposed to the questions of mechanism, right? And therefore, this is to do with the existential limit of science, right? So both from the cognitive limit and from the existential limit, we understand that science has its limits. And Roger Sperry essentially says, Roger Sperry is again a very famous neurophysiologist, again a Nobel laureate. The meaning of the message will not be found in the physics and chemistry of the paper and ink, right? When you write something, the meaning of that is in your head, right? It is not in something that can be observed, dissected, and finally got, right? And lot of times we are essentially concerned about the problem of meaning. So finally, I also have this slide which says science gives us explanations, not causes, right? So, I mean, many of us have issues with, evolution theory, creationism, and so on. And this is what Charles Darwin had to say. This is his quote: "The mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us. I, for one, must be content to remain an agnostic." So he's not commenting on why this has happened. He's providing a plausible explanation of how evolution could have happened. And obviously, when you are talking about mechanism and meaning, there cannot be a contradiction between the two because you are answering two distinct questions there, right? So, I mean, this is as foundational as that, really, right? So, it's and a lot of times you're essentially the question about meaning. If you just the rose that comes from the beloved, right? You don't dissect it and you don't find the meaning exists outside it, right? It's conveying some expression. And